Every day, we take what we have for granted. We live our lives in bliss, unaware that all we know can be stripped away instantly. Once, this ruined and irradiated crater was home to a beautiful kingdom. And deep underground, there are still remnants of this kingdom, the land of Mithrilguard. Of course, also preserved underground is something sinister, evil, locked away beneath the depths of the earth. In the year 1400 AF, after founding, an expedition deeper into the caves was planned by the royal family. And with this expedition, they send their two top advisors, Sir Johan Alpin and Professor Hayden Wright. Sir Alpin and Professor Wright would spend months spelunking in the dark caverns, and while their records of the journey are lost to time, we do know of one specimen they brought back with them. On the day of their return, Professor Wright is said to have ignored the press entirely, quickly rushing to the king and demanding to speak with him, in private. As time passed, the people noticed a change in Professor Wright's behavior. Reports from friends and family noted that he became erratic and irritable, always muttering to himself quietly, and would snap at anyone who spoke to him. One day, however, the reason for Professor Wright's behavior became very clear. One cold morning in the winter of the following year, the lives of the people of Mithrilguard would change for the worse when, after a chain of disturbing events, Professor Wright released spores from the specimen all throughout the cavern's ventilation system. Along with this, Professor Wright also broke into the containment chamber for the specimen. As the spores spread, people all across the caverns became deathly ill. Most notably, however, is that as people died, the specimen seemed to spread, quickly overrunning the city in a matter of days. As the specimen spread, so too did the spore infection, though over time the infection seemed to stop killing people, and instead it began to almost control them. Infected people started to exhibit certain characteristics similar to that of Professor Wright, yet nearly tenfold. Infected people began to attack anyone who wasn't infected, and the first to find this out was, regrettably, the first responder teams who ventured into the quarantine zones to help the sick. Reports from survivors indicated that despite being sick, infected people seemed to fight almost with strategy, like they were prepared to fight. This only seemed to grow clearer when the military began to accompany the teams, only to be met with the infected, armed. What resulted was nothing short of a bloodbath, with subsequent weeks of clashing and fighting in the city streets between the military and the infected. Throughout all of this, a nationwide manhunt for Professor Wright had been in effect since the day he released the spores. The manhunt ended when the king released a public statement in which he promised victory over the infected. Just 2 hours after which, an infected was reported to have surrendered to a squad of soldiers. The infected was unresponsive to anyone who spoke to it. That is, until it was brought before the king. The king had barely gotten a word out when the infected spoke, and when it did, the room went cold. Every torch in the chamber blew out in an instant, the only light source remaining being 2 blue dots in the infected's eyes. When it spoke, its voice boomed like it had the force of 1,000 souls bellowing from its lungs, and it only said one sentence. While there is no written record of what it said, we do know that as soon as it finished, the infected collapsed to the floor, and a small trail of smoke rose from its neck. Upon further inspection, it was discovered that, by unknown means, 2 small letters had been branded on the infected's neck, reading H.W. After this incident, the infected all but disappeared, with no encounters or sightings for almost a month. The people, having not been told about the incident, began to think that they were once again safe, that the infected had died out or disappeared into the caverns. Just a few days before reclamation efforts were set to begin, however, a disaster big enough to dwarf even the spore release would strike, when, during a parade to celebrate the victory, an explosion big enough to rival even the power of the sun would strike the city. Millions of citizens above ground died in the blast, and countless others were buried underground. The royal family disappeared, and many high-ranking advisors and public figures vanished under the stress of the situation. After a few days of chaos, Sir Alpin was the first to stand up, leading the people from the ruins and setting up a base of operations in the nearby fortress of Ironhold. It is now 1403 after founding, 3 years after the fateful expedition that ruined the capital. The fate of Mithrilguard is in Alpin's hands, but the war has only just begun.